The divorce papers landed on my desk at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, delivered by a stone-faced process server who didn't bother with small talk. As I stared at the thick manila envelope, my hands trembling slightly, I couldn't help but think back to that December night when everything started unraveling. One stupid joke, one moment of sitting on my boss's lap at the Christmas party. That's all it took for my husband Graham to remove his wedding ring in front of everyone we knew. But let me back up. My name is Isolde Fenwick, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect life. Suburban house, steady job as an office administrator at TechNova, a 7-year-old daughter named Mila, and a husband who provided well as an IT project manager. Sure, things had gotten routine. Graham worked long hours, came home tired, and we'd fallen into that comfortable but boring rhythm that married couples know all too well. That's when Viktor Kallman became my boss. Vic was everything Graham wasn't: charismatic, spontaneous, and most importantly, he noticed me. At 41, he had that distinguished silver-at-the-temples look that made the other women in the office giggle like schoolgirls. He remembered details about my weekend plans, complimented my outfits, and made me feel like I was more than just another face in the administrative pool. "Isolde, you're wasted in this position," he'd say, leaning against my desk with that $1,000,000 smile. "Someone with your intelligence should be in management." It was harmless flirting, I told myself. Just friendly workplace banter. Graham was being paranoid when he started asking questions about my late nights and weekend team-building activities. The TechNova Christmas party was held in the main conference room, decorated with silver and gold streamers that caught the overhead lights. Someone had set up a decent sound system, and the catering table groaned under the weight of fancy appetizers and an open bar that was already doing brisk business by 7 p.m. I'd spent extra time getting ready that evening, choosing a red dress that hugged my curves just right. Graham had barely looked up from his laptop when I announced I was leaving. "Don't wait up," I'd called over my shoulder. "These things tend to run late." He'd grunted something non-committal, already back to his screen full of code. The party was in full swing when I arrived. Christmas music played softly in the background, while clusters of co-workers stood around making small talk and nursing their drinks. I spotted Vic immediately. He was holding court near the bar, regaling a group of junior developers with some story that had them all laughing. "Isolde," he called out when he saw me, his face lighting up. "There's our star administrator. Come here, beautiful." I felt a warm flush of pleasure at his words. When was the last time Graham had called me beautiful? I couldn't remember. "You look stunning tonight," Vic continued as I approached, his eyes appreciatively taking in my outfit. "That dress is absolutely perfect on you." "Thank you," I replied, accepting the wine glass he offered. "You clean up pretty well yourself." He was wearing a charcoal grey suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, and he wore it with the confidence of a man who knew he looked good. The evening progressed pleasantly enough. I mingled with co-workers, laughed at the appropriate jokes, and felt more alive than I had in months. Vic made sure to include me in conversations, his hand occasionally touching my arm or back as he guided me from group to group. "Your husband couldn't make it?" asked Janet from accounting, glancing around as if Graham might materialize from behind the appetizer table. "Oh, you know how it is," I waved dismissively. "He's buried in some project deadline. Work comes first with Graham." Vic raised an eyebrow. "That's a shame. If I had a wife as gorgeous as Isolde, I'd make sure to show her off at every opportunity." The comment sent a little thrill through me, even as I laughed it off. "You're terrible, Vic." "I'm honest," he corrected, that charming smile never wavering. As the night wore on, and the alcohol flowed more freely, the atmosphere became increasingly relaxed. Someone had dimmed the lights and turned up the music. A few brave souls were even attempting to dance in the small space that had been cleared near the windows. That's when Vic got the idea for photos. Come on, everyone, he called out, pulling out his phone. We need to document this historic occasion. When's the last time the TechNova crew looked this good? What followed was a series of increasingly silly group photos. Professional poses gave way to goofy faces and creative arrangements as people tried to fit into the frame. The alcohol was definitely having an effect on everyone's inhibitions. Wait, Vic laughed, looking at his phone screen. I can't see everyone in the back. We need to get creative with the spacing. That's when he plopped down in one of the conference room chairs and patted his lap. Isolde, you're the smallest. Hop on up here so everyone can fit. The room erupted in laughter and encouraging calls. Do it, Isolde. Come on, it's just for the photo. Don't be a spoilsport. I hesitated for just a moment, thinking about Graham and what he might say. But then I looked around at all my co-workers' expectant faces, at Vic's encouraging smile, and I made a decision that would change everything. Oh, why not? I laughed, settling onto Vic's lap as everyone cheered. His arm wrapped around my waist to steady me, and I could smell his expensive cologne. The camera flashed several times as people took photos with their phones, capturing what I thought was just a harmless moment of office party fun. Perfect, Vic said, but he didn't immediately let go. Instead, his arm tightened slightly around my waist, and I found myself leaning back against his chest. You know, we make a pretty good team. The best, I agreed, caught up in the moment and the attention. That's when I heard the commotion near the entrance to the conference room. The laughter and chatter seemed to die down as heads turned toward the doorway. Following their gaze, I felt my stomach drop. Graham stood in the entrance, still wearing his work clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt that had seen better days. His dark hair was slightly mussed, and his glasses reflected the party lights as he took in the scene before him. His eyes moved from face to face, before finally settling on me, still perched on Vic's lap with his arm around my waist. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. I could feel Vic's body tense beneath me, though his arm remained in place. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Graham, I said, jumping up from Vic's lap with what I hoped was a casual laugh. What are you doing here? I thought you were working. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked slowly into the room, his eyes never leaving mine. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. I finished early. Thought I'd surprise you. The word surprise hung in the air like a challenge. I could feel the weight of everyone's attention, the way they were all watching this little domestic drama play out in front of them. Well, you certainly did that, I said, forcing another laugh. Come on, grab a drink. The party's just getting started. But Graham wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at his left hand, at the simple gold band that had circled his ring finger for 8 years of marriage. Without a word, without any dramatic gesture or angry outburst, he simply slipped the ring off and dropped it into his shirt pocket. The sound it made, a tiny metallic clink against his pen, seemed to echo in the suddenly quiet room. Graham, what are you doing? I whispered, but he was already turning toward the door. Enjoy your party, Isolde, he said without looking back. I'll see you at home. And then he was gone, leaving me standing there in my red dress, surrounded by co-workers who were suddenly very interested in their drinks and the appetizer table. The festive atmosphere had evaporated completely, replaced by an uncomfortable tension that made everyone want to be anywhere else. Well, Vic said after a moment, his voice carefully neutral, that was unexpected. I wanted to run after Graham, to explain that it was just a joke, just a silly photo, but I also didn't want to give my co-workers more drama to gossip about. So I stayed, forcing smiles and making small talk while my mind raced with worry about what I'd find when I got home. The party wound down quickly after that. People made their excuses and drifted away, leaving me to collect my purse and face the drive home. As I walked to my car, I could feel my phone buzzing with text messages, probably from my sister Ruth, who had an uncanny ability to sense family drama from 3 states away, but I didn't check my messages. Instead, I sat in my car for a few minutes, staring at the office building and trying to figure out how something so innocent had gone so wrong so quickly. It was just a photo, I told myself. Just a harmless office party joke. Graham was overreacting, letting his jealousy and insecurities turn a fun moment into some kind of marital crisis. But as I drove home through the quiet suburban streets, I couldn't shake the image of him removing that ring. The calm, deliberate way he'd done it, like he'd already made up his mind about something. The house was dark when I pulled into our driveway at nearly midnight. Graham's car was there, but no lights were on except for the porch light he'd left on for me. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering my courage for the conversation I knew was waiting for me inside. The front door was unlocked, and I slipped inside as quietly as possible. Maybe Graham had gone to bed. Maybe we could talk about this in the morning, when we'd both had time to cool down and think rationally. But as I made my way through the living room, I saw him sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him. He'd changed into jeans and a t-shirt, but he was still wearing his glasses, which meant he'd been reading or working on his laptop. "Graham," I said softly, "we need to talk about what happened tonight." He looked up at me, and even in the dim light, I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "Do we? I think the situation was pretty clear." "It was just a photo," I said, moving closer to the table. "Just a silly office party joke. Everyone was taking pictures, and Vic needed more room for the group shot. That's all it was." "That's all it was," he repeated, his voice flat and emotionless. "Yes, Graham, you're making this into something it's not. I would never—" "Never what, Isolde?" He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the kitchen floor. "Never sit on another man's lap. Never let him put his hands on you. Never flirt with your boss in front of half your office." "I wasn't flirting." The words came out sharper than I intended. "God, Graham, do you hear yourself? You sound paranoid. It was a work function. I was being social and professional." "Professional?" He said the word like it tasted bitter. "Is that what you call it when you stay late for meetings that aren't on your calendar? When you come home smelling like someone else's cologne? When you delete text messages before I can see who they're from?" My heart started racing. How much did he know? How much had he been watching me? "I don't know what you're talking about," I said, but even to my own ears, the denial sounded weak. Graham reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook, the kind he used for work projects. He flipped it open and began reading in that same flat, emotionless voice. "December 3rd, Isolde says she's working late on quarterly reports. Drive by TechNova at 8 p.m. Her car isn't in the parking lot. December 10th, Isolde receives text message at dinner, immediately deletes it, claims it was spam. December 15th, Isolde comes home with new perfume, says it was a gift from Secret Santa. You've been spying on me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You've been following me and taking notes like some kind of stalker." "I've been paying attention to my wife," he corrected, something I apparently should have been doing a lot sooner. I felt a surge of anger. This was exactly the kind of controlling behavior that had been driving me away from him in the first place. "This is insane, Graham. You're acting like a crazy person." "Am I?" He closed the notebook and looked at me directly. "Then explain the credit card charges. Lunch at Romano's on days when you said you brought a sandwich from home. Drinks at Murphy's Bar when you were supposedly in budget meetings. Gas station purchases 20 miles from your office when you claimed to be working late." Each item he listed felt like a physical blow. I'd been so careful, or so I thought. But Graham had always been detail-oriented, methodical. It was what made him good at his job, and apparently, it was what made him good at uncovering his wife's lies. "I can explain all of that," I said, though I wasn't sure how. "I'm sure you can." He walked past me toward the kitchen doorway. "You've always been creative with explanations." "Where are you going?" "To bed, in the guest room." I think we both need some space to figure out what happens next. Graham, wait. I reached out to touch his arm, but he pulled away. Please, let's talk about this. Let's work through it. Work through what exactly? Your lies? Your affair? I'm not having an affair. The words exploded out of me, loud enough that I worried about waking Mila. How can you even say that? He stopped in the doorway and turned back to me. For the first time that night, I saw something other than cold anger in his eyes. I saw hurt, deep, soul-crushing hurt. Because I know you, Isolde. I know when you're lying. I know when you're hiding something. And I know when my wife is falling in love with someone else. The words hung between us like a physical barrier. I wanted to deny them, to protest his accusations, but something in his voice, the certainty, the resignation, made the words stick in my throat. I love you, I whispered instead. Do you? He tilted his head, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. When's the last time you told me about your day without me having to ask? When's the last time you initiated a conversation that wasn't about schedules or household logistics? When's the last time you looked at me the way you looked at him tonight? I opened my mouth to answer, but realized I couldn't. When had things between us become so distant? When had we stopped being partners and started being roommates who happened to share a mortgage and a child? I thought so, Graham said quietly. Good night, Isolde. This time I didn't try to stop him. I stood alone in the dark kitchen, listening to his footsteps on the stairs and the soft click of the guest room door closing. Then I heard another sound, the quiet beep of his phone as he sent a text message to someone. Who could he be texting at this hour? The thought sent a chill through me. Was Graham having his own secrets, his own late-night conversations with someone who understood him better than his wife did? I crept upstairs and paused outside the guest room door, listening for any sound that might give me a clue about what he was doing in there. But the house was silent except for the familiar sounds of settling wood and the hum of the heating system. In our bedroom, my bedroom now, I supposed, I changed out of the red dress that had caused so much trouble and caught sight of myself in the mirror. My makeup was smudged, my hair disheveled from the stress of the evening. I looked like what I was, a woman whose carefully constructed world was starting to crumble. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Ruth. How was the party? Did you wear the red dress? I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. It was fine. Talk tomorrow. But I knew it wasn't fine. Nothing about this situation was fine, and I had the sinking feeling that it was going to get much worse before it got better. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about the notebook Graham had been reading from. How long had he been documenting my activities? What else had he noticed that I thought I'd kept hidden? And more importantly, what was he planning to do with all that information? I woke up the next morning to the sound of Mila's voice downstairs, chattering away about something involving her upcoming school Christmas play. The normalcy of it felt surreal after the previous night's confrontation. For a moment, I could pretend that everything was fine, that Graham and I had simply had a minor disagreement that would blow over. But when I made my way downstairs, the illusion shattered immediately. Graham was sitting at the kitchen table with Mila, helping her with her cereal and reviewing her spelling homework. He looked up when I entered, and his expression was politely neutral, the kind of face you'd make for a stranger or a casual acquaintance. Morning, he said simply, then turned his attention back to Mila's worksheet. Good morning, I replied, trying to match his casual tone. Mila, sweetie, don't forget you have dance class after school today. I know, Mummy, she said without looking up from her homework. Daddy already reminded me. He's picking me up today. I glanced at Graham in surprise. Usually, I handled the afternoon pickup routine. Oh, I can get her. I don't have any meetings this afternoon. I've got it covered, Graham said, still not looking at me. I rearranged my schedule. There was something in his tone that suggested this wasn't up for discussion. Mila, oblivious to the undercurrents of tension, continued working on her spelling words while humming a song from her Christmas play. Daddy, how do you spell wonderful? She asked. Wonderful, Graham replied patiently. Remember, the E is silent. Like in terrible, Mila asked, and I nearly choked on my coffee. That's right, sweetheart. Some words have silent letters that you can't hear when you say them out loud. I couldn't tell if Graham intended the comment as a metaphor, but it felt like one. How many silent, unspoken things were hiding in our marriage? How many words were we not saying to each other? After Mila finished her breakfast and went upstairs to brush her teeth, I tried again to bridge the gap between Graham and me. About last night, I began, but he cut me off. Not now, Isolde. Mila will be back down in a minute. Then when? We can't just pretend this didn't happen. He finally looked at me directly, and I saw that same cold, analytical expression from the night before. I'm not pretending anything. I'm being very clear about what I saw and what it means. What it means? I felt my temper rising again. It means you have trust issues. It means you're so insecure that you can't handle your wife having a friendly relationship with her colleagues. Friendly, he repeated, the same way he'd said professional the night before. Yes, friendly. God, Graham, do you want me to be miserable at work? Do you want me to sit in my cubicle like a nun and never speak to anyone? I want you to act like a married woman, he said quietly. I want you to remember that you have a husband and a daughter who should matter more than impressing your boss. The words stung because there was truth in them. When had Vic's approval started mattering more to me than Graham's feelings? When had I started prioritizing the excitement of workplace flirtation over the stability of my family? But I wasn't ready to admit that, not even to myself. I'm acting like a married woman, I said, a married woman who has her own life and her own career and her own friendships. Friendships, Graham said, and I could hear the quotation marks in his voice. Before I could respond, Mila came bounding back downstairs with her backpack and dance bag. I'm ready for school. Graham stood up and grabbed his keys. Come on, kiddo, let's get you to school. Aren't you going to kiss Mommy goodbye? Mila asked, looking between us with the innocent confusion of a child who sensed something was wrong, but couldn't identify what it was. Graham and I looked at each other across the kitchen. For a moment, I thought he might soften, might give me the perfunctory peck on the cheek that had become our standard morning farewell. Instead, he reached over and squeezed my shoulder, the kind of gesture you'd make to a roommate or a distant relative. Have a good day at work, Isolde, he said. I'm sure it will be very productive. And then he was gone, taking Mila and leaving me alone with my coffee and the growing certainty that my marriage was in serious trouble. I arrived at TechNova that morning to find the office buzzing with post-party gossip. I could see clusters of co-workers whispering near the coffee machine and by the copy center, and I had no doubt about what they were discussing. The story of Graham's dramatic exit was probably already making the rounds, growing more sensational with each retelling. Isolde, Janet from accounting appeared at my desk almost before I'd had a chance to sit down. How are you doing today, honey? That was quite a scene last night. What scene? I tried to play it off casually. Graham just stopped by to say hello. He couldn't stay long because of work. Janet's expression suggested she wasn't buying my explanation, but she was too polite to push further. Well, if you need to talk, you know where to find me. I thanked her and tried to focus on my computer screen, but I could feel eyes on me from around the office. Every conversation that stopped when I walked by, every glance in my direction, felt like confirmation that my personal life had become the subject of office entertainment. Around 10 a.m., Vic appeared at my desk with a cup of coffee and a concerned expression. How are you holding up? He asked, settling into the chair beside my desk. Last night got a little intense there at the end. I'm fine, I lied. Graham was just tired and stressed about a work deadline. You know how it is. Vic nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. Listen, Isolde, I hope I didn't cause any problems at home. The photo thing was just meant to be fun. I never intended to create issues between you and your husband. You didn't create anything, I assured him. Graham's just been dealing with some insecurity issues lately. It's not about you. Still, Vic said, maybe we should be more careful about appearances. You know how people talk in offices like this. Something in his tone made me look at him more carefully. Was he backing away from me? Was he regretting the attention he'd been giving me? Careful about what appearances? I asked. We're colleagues. We work together. There's nothing inappropriate about that. Of course not, he agreed quickly. I just mean that some people might misinterpret our working relationship, especially after last night. Let them misinterpret, I said, feeling a surge of defiance. I'm not going to change how I behave at work because my husband is having trust issues. Vic studied my face for a moment, and I could see him weighing his words carefully. Maybe you should talk to someone about this, a counselor or therapist. Sometimes an outside perspective can help couples work through these kinds of problems. We don't need a therapist, I said, though even as I spoke the words, I wondered if they were true. We just need Graham to realize that he's overreacting to a harmless situation. If you say so, Vic said, standing up from the chair. But Isolde, if things get complicated, I want you to know that I value our working relationship too much to let personal drama interfere with it. He walked away before I could ask what exactly he meant by that, leaving me with the uncomfortable feeling that my strongest ally at work was starting to distance himself from me. I spent my lunch break on the phone with my sister Ruth, who lived 3 hours away, but always seemed to know exactly what I needed to hear. He removed his wedding ring. Ruth's voice was incredulous. In front of everyone? What kind of man does that? That's what I said. I felt validated hearing my own outrage reflected in her voice. It was so dramatic and embarrassing. I had to face everyone at work today, knowing they all witnessed that scene. Isolde, honey, I've been saying for years that Graham has control issues. Remember when you wanted to take that weekend trip with me, and he made such a big deal about it? I did remember, though I'd forgotten about it until Ruth brought it up. Graham had been concerned about the expense and the timing, but Ruth had interpreted his practical concerns as an attempt to isolate me from my family. This is just more of the same behavior, Ruth continued. He wants you to be completely dependent on him, never to have your own friends or your own life. It's textbook emotional manipulation. I don't know, I said, feeling confused. Maybe I should have been more careful about the photo thing. Maybe I should have considered how it would look. Absolutely not. Ruth's voice was firm. You are a grown woman with the right to have friendships and professional relationships. The fact that your boss appreciates you and treats you well should make Graham happy, not jealous. That's what I think too, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure anymore. Listen, you need to stand your ground on this, Ruth advised. If you start walking on eggshells and apologizing for things you didn't do wrong, it'll just get worse. Graham needs to learn that he can't control you with jealousy and dramatic gestures. By the time I hung up the phone, I felt more confident about my position. Ruth was right. I hadn't done anything wrong. Graham was the one with the problem, and I wasn't going to let his insecurities dictate how I lived my life. But as I drove home that afternoon, I couldn't shake the memory of the hurt in Graham's eyes the night before. Whatever his faults, whatever his jealousy issues, he was still my husband. He was still the father of my daughter, and he was still the man I'd promised to love and cherish for better or worse. The question was, how much worse were things going to get before they got better? When I got home that afternoon, I found Graham in his home office with the door closed. I could hear the low murmur of his voice through the door. He was on a phone call with someone. Probably work, I told myself, though something about his tone seemed more personal than professional. Mila was in the living room, working on a puzzle and humming to herself. She looked up when I came in, and I was struck by how much she resembled Graham. The same dark hair, the same serious expression when she was concentrating. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, settling down beside her on the floor. "How was school today?" "Good," she said, fitting a corner piece into place. "Mrs. Henderson said I did really well on my math test." "That's wonderful. I'm so proud of you." "Mommy, Mila's voice was hesitant and she didn't look up from her puzzle. Are you and Daddy fighting? The question hit me like a physical blow. I'd been so focused on my conflict with Graham that I hadn't considered how it might be affecting our daughter. What makes you ask that, honey? Daddy slept in the guest room last night, she said matter-of-factly. And this morning, you both seemed sad. I struggled to find the right words. How do you explain adult relationship problems to a 7-year-old without frightening them or making them feel responsible? Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, I said finally. It doesn't mean we don't love each other, and it definitely doesn't mean we don't love you. Daddy and I are just working through some things right now. Like when Tommy and I had a fight about the swing set, but then we made up. Something like that, I agreed, though I suspected our situation was considerably more complicated than a playground dispute. Will you make up soon? Mila asked, finally looking at me with those serious dark eyes. I hope so, sweetheart. I really hope so. But even as I said the words, I wasn't sure I believed them. The Graham I'd faced that morning had seemed like a stranger, cold, distant, analytical. Where was the man who used to leave me little notes in my lunchbox? Where was the husband who used to slow dance with me in the kitchen while dinner was cooking? That evening, Graham emerged from his office long enough to have dinner with us, but the conversation was stilted and awkward. He asked Mila about her school day and helped her with her homework, but he barely acknowledged my presence except when absolutely necessary. Can you pass the salt? He asked at one point. Graham, we need to talk, I said as I handed it to him. Not now, he replied, glancing meaningfully at Mila. Then when? You can't avoid me forever. I'm not avoiding you. I'm protecting our daughter from unnecessary drama. The word unnecessary stung. Was that how he saw our marriage problems? As unnecessary drama that could be solved if I just stopped creating complications. After dinner, Graham took Mila upstairs for her bath and bedtime routine. I cleaned up the kitchen and tried to think of a way to break through the wall he'd built between us. Maybe if I apologized for the photo incident, acknowledged that it had been inappropriate, we could start to rebuild the trust between us. But when I knocked on his office door later that evening, the conversation didn't go as I'd planned. Come in, he said without looking up from his computer screen. I entered to find him surrounded by papers, bank statements, credit card bills, phone records. My heart started racing as I recognized the scope of what he was doing. What is all this? I asked, though I already knew. Research, he said simply. I'm trying to get a complete picture of what's been happening in our marriage. You're investigating me like I'm some kind of criminal. I'm documenting facts, he corrected. Would you like to explain any of these charges? Lunch at Romano's on December 8th, when you told me you were eating at your desk. Drinks at Murphy's Bar on December 12th, when you said you were in a late meeting. Each item he mentioned felt like a nail in my coffin. I'd been so careful to cover my tracks, or so I thought. But Graham had always been methodical, detail-oriented. He approached problems like a programmer, systematically, logically, without emotion clouding his judgment. I can explain those, I said, though I wasn't sure how. I'm listening. The lunch at Romano's was a working lunch. Vic wanted to discuss some upcoming projects in a quieter environment than the office. A working lunch that lasted 3 hours? I felt my cheeks burn. Had it really been that long? Time seemed to disappear when I was with Vic, listening to his stories about his travels, his plans for the company, his dreams for the future. We had a lot to discuss. I'm sure you did. And the drinks at Murphy's. That was a group thing. Several people from the office went out after work. Several people, Graham repeated, pulling out another piece of paper. According to your credit card statement, you paid for 2 drinks. 2 drinks, Isolde, not a group tab. I opened my mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain that Vic and I had ended up alone after the others left? How could I describe the way he'd looked at me across the table? The way he'd listened to me complain about feeling unappreciated at home? It's not what you think, I said finally. What do I think, Isolde? You think I'm having an affair. You think I'm cheating on you. Graham leaned back in his chair and studied me with those analytical eyes. Are you? The question hung in the air between us. Technically, the answer was no. Vic and I had never kissed, never been physically intimate, but we'd shared conversations that felt more intimate than anything I'd experienced with my husband in months. We'd exchanged looks that carried more passion than I felt when Graham touched me. We'd developed an emotional connection that I treasured more than my marriage vows. No, I said, but the word came out as barely a whisper. Are you sure about that? I've never slept with him, if that's what you're asking. That's not what I'm asking, Graham said quietly. I'm asking if you're having an affair. Physical intimacy is just one component of infidelity, Isolde. What about emotional intimacy? What about the conversations you have with him that you don't have with me? What about the way you light up when you talk about him? What about the way you've been pulling away from our family to spend more time with him? Each question felt like a scalpel, cutting away at the justifications I'd built up in my mind. When had my relationship with Vic crossed the line from professional to personal? When had I started looking forward to seeing him more than I looked forward to coming home to my family? You're twisting everything, I said, but even I could hear the weakness in my voice. Am I? Let me ask you something, Isolde. When's the last time you told me about something exciting that happened at work? When's the last time you asked me about my projects or my goals? When's the last time you seemed genuinely interested in spending time with me? I tried to think of examples, but my mind was blank. When had Graham and I stopped being partners and started being strangers who happened to live in the same house? We've both been busy, I said lamely. Busy, he agreed. You've been very busy. Busy with lunch dates and after-work drinks and text conversations that you delete before I can see them. You're being paranoid. Stop. Graham's voice was sharp enough to cut me off mid-sentence. Stop lying to me, Isolde. Stop gaslighting me and making me feel crazy for noticing what's happening in my own marriage. I have eyes, I have a brain, and I have 8 years of knowing you well enough to recognize when you're falling in love with someone else. The words hit me like a physical blow. Falling in love? Was that what was happening? Had my admiration for Vic, my excitement about our conversations, my anticipation of seeing him each day, had all of that evolved into something deeper and more dangerous? I love you, I said, but the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Do you? Graham asked. Or do you love the security I provide? The house, the stability, the child support, the health insurance. That's not fair, isn't it? When's the last time you chose to spend time with me when you could have been somewhere else? When's the last time you seemed happy to see me walk through the door? I couldn't answer because I couldn't remember. When had my marriage become something I endured rather than something I cherished? I want to work on this, I said desperately. I want to fix whatever's broken between us. Graham looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression. For just an instant, I caught a glimpse of the man I'd married, the one who used to look at me like I was the most important person in his world. Do you? He asked softly. Do you really want to fix this, Isolde? Or do you just want me to stop asking questions so you can go back to your double life? I don't have a double life. Don't you? He gestured to the papers spread across his desk, because all of this evidence suggests otherwise. I stared at the documentation of my deceptions, the credit card statements, the phone records, the timeline he'd constructed of my lies. When had I become someone who lived in shadows and half-truths? When had I become someone who could look her husband in the eye and lie without flinching? What do you want from me? I asked. I want the truth, Graham said. All of it. No more lies, no more excuses, no more gaslighting. I want you to tell me exactly what's been happening between you and Viktor Kallman. The sound of Vic's full name in Graham's voice sent a chill through me. This wasn't just about a photo at a Christmas party anymore. This was about the complete breakdown of trust in our marriage, and I wasn't sure it could ever be rebuilt. The next few days passed in a tense stalemate. Graham continued sleeping in the guest room and maintaining his polite but distant demeanor around me. He spoke when necessary, helped with Mila's routine, and went through the motions of normal family life. But underneath it all, I could feel him watching me, cataloguing my behavior, adding to his growing file of evidence. My hands shook so badly I had to type with my thumbs pressed hard against the screen, anchoring myself like I was performing a delicate procedure instead of sending a message that could collapse a whole world. The cursor blinked, impatient, while Mila's footsteps thumped upstairs and her humming drifted down the hallway like everything in our house was still normal. I forced myself to breathe and began to write. Victor, I need to be clear. I'm married. I let things get too close, and it's hurting my family. I can't do lunches, drinks, or private talks anymore. Please don't contact me unless it's strictly work. The words looked stiff and formal, like they belonged to someone braver than me. I read them twice, then again, hoping the message would magically rewrite itself into something softer, something that didn't feel like an amputation. My thumb hovered over send. Graham didn't speak. He just watched me with a stillness that felt more dangerous than yelling. His ring finger was bare. I kept noticing it like a missing tooth. Upstairs, Mila called again, closer now. Daddy, I really need it. Graham's voice remained calm as he answered, On the counter, sweetheart. I swallowed, and in that second the quiet hit me. How easily he could sound like a good father while becoming a stranger to me. How cleanly he could separate what Mila needed from what I had broken. I pressed send. The message flew away, and immediately I regretted it, not because it wasn't true, but because I could already feel the hollow space it would leave. I waited for relief. It didn't come. What came instead was a cold dread, the kind you feel when you sign a document you can't undo. Mila padded into the kitchen, grabbed her book and darted back toward the door. She paused when she noticed the tension in the air, her gaze bouncing between us like she was trying to decode an adult language. Are you mad at Mummy? She asked softly. My throat tightened. Graham's expression didn't change, but his voice gentled. No, sweetheart, we're just talking. Mila nodded like she accepted the answer, but her eyes lingered on Graham's hand, on the missing ring, long enough to make my stomach twist. Then she left, and the front door clicked shut behind her, sealing us back into the silence. My phone buzzed almost immediately. A reply. I stared at the screen for a second too long, my pulse hammering in my ears before I turned it toward myself. Graham didn't reach for it. He didn't have to. The fact that Victor responded so fast was its own confession. I read the message, and the blood drained from my face. Graham watched my expression and leaned forward slightly, as if he could already tell whatever Victor wrote wasn't going to help me. What did he say? Graham asked, quiet and controlled. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out at first. Because the message wasn't angry. It wasn't apologetic. It was familiar, and it made it painfully clear that I hadn't been the only one keeping secrets.